Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, disaster planning, emergency management, crisis management, well-being, COVID, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I respond to everything I get. Couple of quick announcements. A reminder, I will be co-presenting a keynote speech at the BCI World in London, England on November 2nd and 3rd. Hope you can make it and join us there. And second, Preparing for the Unexpected will be broadcasting live from the Continuity and Resilience Today conference with someone you know from the show, James Green. He will be co-hosting with me. We'll be chatting with different guests and different subjects. That's November 16th and 17th, and hopefully you're in the neighborhood and you can stop by and sign up and attend the conference. It's just down the road, actually, from my house. It'll be in Toronto. Today, we're going to be talking about building resilience in small businesses. And I'd like to welcome to the show today, I want to make sure I get the title right, founder of Resilient Ready in Melbourne, Australia. So joining us from a long way today, Renae Hanvin. Renae, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to see you. How are things in Melbourne today?
Melbourne's not too bad. We're coming out of winter into summer, so getting a little glimpse of the sunshine. So early morning here, so it's pretty good.
Well, from what I recall, your winters are summers anyway. So,
oh well, they used to be, but no, they're definitely getting a little bit colder. And I think we've just gone past the mark where every year we say, "Why don't we move to Queensland? Why do we live down south?" So yes, no, summer's coming, which is good.
Good. For anyone that may not know who you are, could you just take a minute and introduce yourself, what you do, and how you got into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Renae Hanvin. I'm the founder of a social enterprise called Resilient Ready and based in Melbourne, but we do work all across Australia and internationally. So my passion and focus is small business resilience, because I know that small businesses are the economic heart and soul of communities, and there's not been a lot of focus on businesses. So I'm really passionate about how we can help build capabilities and set businesses up to thrive. And it all started, I actually worked for the Australian Postal Service back in about 2013 when Brisbane flooded, so one of the main cities up in Queensland. And I was watching what was happening to all the Australia Post licensees, the little stores owned by mums and dads. And I think that really set an interest in me as to what can I do to help them get more prepared. So yeah, it's a side of resilience, I think, that is, I used to call it the forgotten stakeholder group. So I think COVID globally obviously has put them on the map, and we need to be helping small businesses in their journey as well.
I remember the floods in Brisbane. I've got a book here somewhere that talks about it. And I was in Brisbane. The part, I can't remember what it's called, but it's got the Brisbane Eye. And that section there, nice shops and everything. And by one of those shops, it's a cream-colored wall or a white wall, but you can actually see darker colors below it, a line right across, and that's how high it is, how the water went. And I kind of went, wow, that's pretty high considering if you look towards the river, everything goes down like this, including the beach and the sidewalks. And I went, wow, that was quite the flood here.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, I like to use the kind of 80-20 rule when planning for disasters. And that's what we tell a lot of the communities and that we work on. But, how do you really plan for a flood that is so large? And we've had, northern New South Wales here around Lismore. And I know you've got family from Lismore. Like they had the experience last year and a couple of, about 3-4 years ago as well. And it's interesting because the conversations now are not about how do you get things so that you can lift them up, because you can't really lift them up high enough anymore because the floods are going almost up to the second story. Now it's about how can you bag your things and tie them down so they stay dry and don't float away. So it's
True,
extraordinary.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Lismore later on. But I have a question to start with first. Since we're going to be talking about small businesses, using that as a frame of reference, how do you define resilience?
Gosh, that's the magical word of the moment, isn't it? And I think it's the word that
I won't hold it to you.
No, well, do you know what? It's funny because going into communities, and we've been doing a lot with bushfire impacted communities, and resilience now is almost, it just doesn't mean anything. I think it's because it's become a word that is just utilized everywhere, which is extraordinary because I've called my business Resilient Ready. So I think resilient is a better word than resilience, because resilience is, I guess, a form of the future. We need to build resilience. Okay, yeah, but what does that actually mean? Many of us are already, we have resilience in us. So when disaster and chaos happens, we just do things that make us resilient. But I think resilient and ready is where I guess the culture needs to come. And resilient ready for me is that we are as ready as possible for whatever disruption might come to impact us. So it's all about preparedness and getting ready before.
Now, we're going to be talking about small businesses. So are we talking mom and pop shops, corner store, or are we talking 300 employees, small manufacturing? What do we call a small business?
Yeah, so we call small businesses those with up to 19 or 20 employees. So anything that's kind of 20 to 200 employees is usually a medium sort of growing up to a medium-sized corporate. So small businesses equate to, I think it's now up to 98% of businesses around the world from a totality number as small businesses. So it's everything from likely your GP, your chemist, your hairdresser, your franchise owner of one of the big multinationals. It's your, the guy next door who does your lawns. It's a whole myriad of people, mums, dads. I think the COVID has, made a lot of people, I guess, reset what they want to do. And so they've set up their own side hustles, or they're solopreneurs, etc. So it's really that kind of, I guess, that category of people, any age, any industry, but no more than about 19 employees.
You mentioned something earlier that I thought was rather interesting too, that when we were talking, that it's kind of an area that's overlooked, and if they take up 90, what was the number, 98%, 97, 98% of all businesses, and yet that's obviously a massive percentage, but it's overlooked, and resilience, compliance, and everybody, even government, tends to look at that remaining 3%. Why is that then? Why are they the forgotten realm?
It's a really interesting question, and I guess one I spent a few years researching and trying to kind of identify. And I think there's a few reasons for it. I guess from a economic perspective, obviously it's probably easier for government to work with the big industry end of town that brings in, the multi-billions and squillions of taxpayer dollars, etc.
Yeah.
And I think before COVID, and we had catastrophic bushfires in 2019 and 20, and there were so many stories of small business owners whose business went out of business because they were off fighting the fires as a volunteer firefighter, or the business went out of business because of all the sometimes mostly unwanted goods that were being delivered into the community, which meant no one bought from the shop. And I think, you don't know what you don't know. And dare I say it, a lot of people in government are very smart and they're wonderful people, but they have never owned a business. They've never run a business. They've never, a lot of the times, they've never been in a community that's been impacted by a disaster. And you don't know what you don't know. So I think the notion of, business and the term business being that big multinational major corporate profit-making machine is actually incorrect, because again, 98% globally are your mums, dads, immigrants just setting up a restaurant. Do you know what I mean? So it's the culture of society. So yeah, I think it's time that we need to start thinking differently about them as well.
You mentioned a point there that a lot of times these politicians haven't run a small business like this, but they come from the big corporate. So that's the
Correct.
only area they know, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
how do you turn that around? How do you get them to start looking at something? And I know, well, there's all kinds of things we can probably talk about, but how do you get that change to happen, to flip, focus from the 3% to the 97?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's something that I've been advocating for about 5 years now. And I had people in senior positions at the federal government say, "Oh, that's really nice, Renae, but we don't look after businesses." And even now, I'm finding I have meetings with, emergency services people, very high up in government, or business people. And I think the business community kind of fits in a bit of a hole. And, it's not me. Oh, I look after disasters, but I don't look after businesses. Or I look after businesses, but not to get them ready for a disaster. So we've been working behind the scenes on a lot of advocacy around how can we, whose responsibility is it, first of all, and then how can we change the focus and include them. And a great example is I was advising a government department on, they process mapped the experience of a person when a bushfire happened. And I sat there for 20 minutes and I listened, and it's like, oh, that's lovely. And it's very pretty and it's very exciting, it looks very shiny. And I said to them, what about the 8, 10, 12, 14 hours that they go to their job? They earn a livelihood. They run a business. Why is that not anywhere in your plan? Oh, no, we haven't been briefed to do that. So how do you plan for disasters and plan for recovery and response without considering the fact that people have to earn a livelihood and businesses have to stay open, if not to make money for the business owner, but to serve and deliver products and services vital for the community?
It seems to be a little bit of uh, polarizing issue, because you've got your small business and you have your, let's say, up to 20 people. You have a bushfire, using your example. Let's say half of those employees go to volunteer to help their community and help their state or their country, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And at the same time, on the other end, now their business is suffering. So they go to
100%.
help one area to
Yep.
just kind of, that is suffering. They go to help that, and their area now is suffering, but in a different way.
Oh, 100%. And I've seen it in real life over and over and over again. And then you have, particularly in, rural areas and regional areas, business owners, like they are really, important people in communities. So the businesses in those areas are social and economic heartbeats of communities. And there's a loyalty and there's they don't want to let the employees who are local community members down. So I've seen firsthand examples of business owners siphoning through hundreds of thousands of dollars of their savings to keep their employees paid, so they don't have to take the responsibility of their employees not being able to pay their rent. Now, how does that roll when they're out fighting fires as volunteers to not necessarily save even their community, but save the community down the road? So it's wrong. And part of our advocacy is we have a pay to participate and paid to participate. So big corporate ends of town, if they want to do work with us, they pay to participate, and we take some of what they pay and we pay it forward to those small business owners. Because if they're involved in, deciding national strategy or coming up with plans, and everyone else around the table is being paid their big corporate or government salary, those people with the most experience should be paid too. And that's something I'm really passionate about as well. And as a small business owner, I get asked to comment and participate in things all the time. Now, I have more knowledge to give than most people who are asking me the questions. So I don't give any knowledge to certain stakeholders unless they pay for it.
Yeah, really, everyone should benefit somehow, but also, pay your dues to get that as well.
100%. And by paying me, it's paid on. Do you know what I mean? We're a social
yeah.
enterprise. So we help and support those community people who need it the most. So, yeah.
So with communities and their business centers and all the small shops, should they mobilize some way to get the ball rolling, or approach someone and say, hey, we need the same kind of support that you're giving, the huge conglomerates? obviously maybe not the same scale, but some level of support. Should that be a starting point for small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, Alex, the reality of a small business owner, you are working, 20 hours a day probably.
Mm,
You are putting all of your time, energy, your cash flow into keeping your business in business, particularly at the moment with all the challenges of COVIDs and floods, etc. So I think, there's a lot of, and working with a wonderful academic based in the Blue Mountains, Dr. Val Ingham, who's looked at fatigue. There is so much fatigue. So if you're just trying to get through the day and then you're so fatigued, and we have a Biz Community Toolkit program, which is a micro-learning approach that we deliver in business communities, so like local government areas. And we ask questions, we build skills, little 5-minute intervals, but we also collect data. And there's a Queensland council that we had a couple of hundred businesses participate. And the data told us that 25% of those businesses can't keep going. So they want to shut up shop. That's not because a disaster has put them out of business, but they just don't want to do business anymore. And that's alarming for a community if a quarter of the businesses and small businesses in those communities don't want to do business anymore. So I think those kind of stats is what we're trying to drive and advocate and put to politicians to say, hey, if this is in one community, imagine what it is around all the others. That's a major economic issue for this country.
Is that something, when you say don't want to do business anymore, is that the kind of, you know what, I'm tired of this 20-hour days, I'm just done, that kind of a response?
100%. Yeah. So the module in particular that we have for that is called Can't Keep Going. And we ask 2 questions. And one question is, are you thinking about closing your business because you can't keep going? And 25% are saying yes. So in this particular Queensland LGA, we're now doing workshops and working with that community to understand what it is. I mean, is it because some of them are at the retirement age and they're like, you know what?
Yeah.
Too many disasters, we're about to hang up our boots, so maybe we'll do it now? Or is it just that literally people have just had enough because they're putting in, money, hard work, it's taking over their lives, and they don't know where to go. There seems no success coming out of it. The profits that they were probably making a few years ago, it's a different way of having to do business now because of all the different disruptions. So it's an interesting conundrum, but it's a big issue for every country if that's the reality.
You were talking about a local council there. What about chambers of commerce? Is that something that can be leveraged by small businesses to try and get things turned around and help?
Yeah, definitely. So we do a lot of work with chambers of commerce, and I'm going to go 2 sides of the fence here. So to me, chambers of commerce are very, I guess, they're successful based on the volunteers or the people who are leading it. So if you have a wonderful chair or committee of your chamber that's really passionate and really inclusive, and I've seen it in some of the little small towns impacted by the bushfires, you are thriving because you have fantastic leadership to thrive. The other side of the fence, and one of my volunteer advisors said this to me, that a lot of the chambers around are full of pale, stale males that are politically motivated. So they might have mayor on their bucket list. So that's not an inclusive environment that would welcome probably the majority of small businesses. So I think chambers have that. To me, it depends on who's leading it and who's able to actively be part of it. So we just wrote a white paper in the Blue Mountains on business community networks, and that was alongside Professor Daniel Aldrich from Northeastern University in Boston. So he's the global expert on social capital, looking at business community networks. And it was alarming that businesses there don't know why they should be networking as businesses. Now that to me just seems extraordinary, because not only if you are connected before a disaster, are you more resilient and ready for the disaster because you've got the people around you, but networks bring you knowledge and business opportunities and, collaborations for supplier costs, et cetera. So I find that in itself quite extraordinary.
The other thing that caught my attention, and now I'm thinking of other questions too. I got to hopefully I don't forget any of these. You mentioned 25%, want to, or thinking at some point, maybe just closing up the doors and that's it. What are the other 75% doing different by way of resilience? What's their thinking? Are they doing something, thinking something different? What's setting them apart? And I guess I'll just add this too, because some of that, what you just said too, it got me thinking is maybe that 75% has a stronger business network.
Absolutely. So business networks are, the untapped kind of golden nugget within business communities, what we're finding. And I think, there's multiple, I guess, answers to the other 75%. They could have different businesses that, many thrived through COVID. So, I mean, I'm talking to you from Melbourne, the most locked down city in the world. We had 2 years of lockdowns and curfews. You couldn't go out to your local, milk bar, had to shut at 9 o'clock at night. So I couldn't get milk. And that means they couldn't trade. So they weren't earning money. I think it's, again, from leadership, some businesses found positive opportunities to reset their business and come up with new ideas. So we had, production lines that made gin turned into sanitizing production lines, etc. Yeah. I think absolutely networks. I think businesses who were more prepared. I mean, I've got an MBA. I never learned that the government could mandate the front door of my business had to be closed. I was not prepared for that. But I think those that could respond quickly, could adapt quickly. So again, restaurants went to takeaway, etc. Those businesses have been thriving. So I think it's a mixture of things, but absolutely about business community collaborations and connections and support and, even competitor collaborations. So I saw great examples of, competitors coming together, and they're still doing that now. To help each other to thrive and to get through, these quite challenging times.
Don't let me forget, I have an example about what you just said when we talk about Lismore and the floods later on. Don't let me forget that.
Okay.
It sounds a little bit like some of that 75, and I really shouldn't just say 25 and 75%, but some successful businesses have a network that is a little bit beyond just a business network. It sounds like they have, they're more aware of some of the other things in their community that might be going on and other resources, right? It's not just the business next door. I know them, so, I'm more resilient because we can just pass things back and forth. It seems to be a little bit more than that. Am I kind of thinking right?
Yeah, 100%. So things like, I guess, during the bushfires and whatnot, there were evacuation help. People evacuated their houses and couldn't evacuate their businesses unless they had other help. So, to move machinery or shut down manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. So the connections, and I referred to Professor Daniel Aldrich before. So his approach to social capital or community connections, there's 3. There's bonding, bridging, and linking ties. And it's a really great structure because I'm going to get these wrong, but your bonding ties are like your family and your really close friends. Now, if they tell you that there's a bushfire coming, apparently you're probably not going to believe them. You're going to go, yeah, whatever. Your bridging ties, are like the business, across the road down the street, your competitors, the industry associations. Those bridging ties are your networks that you absolutely believe and you want to be part of. So people, almost your employees, could be bridging ties as well. And then the other one is linking ties. And linking ties are the connections that you make kind of, I guess, if the other 2 are sort of horizontal, these ones are vertical. So that'd be connections that you have to your local emergency services or your local, local council or your local government. And I think when you're thinking about networks, if you just think of the business next door, although in saying that, a lot of businesses don't know the people in the business next door. But if you think about, I guess, the matrix of connections that you could have, and there's data that, again, Professor Aldrich has done, that connected communities are more resilient than affluent communities. So the argument that you need money to build resilience is incorrect. You just need to connect your people, and then that builds resilience.
Interesting. We've come to the end of our first segment. We are talking today with Renae Hanvin, and who is the founder of Resilient Ready, joining us today from Melbourne, Australia. And we'll be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.